They're in your life right now. The colleague who takes credit for your ideas while making it seem like collaboration. The friend who always needs something but vanishes when you need support. The family member who uses guilt like a surgical instrument, cutting just deep enough to make you bleed compliance. Manipulators don't announce themselves. They don't walk into your life wearing a sign that says, "I'm here to exploit you." They come disguised as friends, lovers, mentors, family. They speak your language. They learn your vulnerabilities. And they use your own goodness against you. You've felt it, that gnawing sensation after an interaction, where somehow you agreed to something you didn't want, defended yourself against accusations you didn't deserve, or found yourself apologizing for boundaries you had every right to set. Here's what makes this particularly insidious. The tactics that work against honest people fail spectacularly against manipulators. Being kind makes you a better target. Being trusting makes you easier to exploit. Being empathetic gives them the blueprint for controlling you. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire filled with schemers, flatterers, and power-hungry manipulators, people who would smile to his face while plotting his downfall. Yet he maintained power and peace of mind through principles that are just as effective today. The Stoics weren't naive idealists. They were hardened realists operating in one of history's most treacherous political environments. They developed specific ruthless tactics for dealing with manipulative people, not through manipulation in return, but through something far more powerful: strategic emotional invulnerability. Today, you're going to learn 7 Stoic tactics that manipulators can't counter. Not theory, not philosophy for philosophy's sake, but practical, immediately applicable strategies that will transform you from target to fortress. Right now, someone in your life is playing a game you don't even realize you're in. Walk through your day and watch the subtle manipulations unfold. Your boss asks you to take on one small additional project, framing it as an opportunity, as trust in your abilities. You agree because refusing feels like rejecting their confidence. 3 months later, you're doing 2 jobs for 1 salary, and they never explicitly promised anything different. You can't even point to a lie, just a careful construction of implications. Your partner sighs heavily when you mention plans with friends. They don't say you can't go. They don't have to. They've created an atmosphere where you choosing yourself feels like you're hurting them, so you cancel. Again, and the walls of your world get smaller while they maintain plausible deniability. "I never said you couldn't go." Your parent calls with that particular tone of voice, the one that communicates disappointment before words are even spoken. They mention how alone they feel, how other children visit more, how they don't want to burden you, but the sentence never needs completion. You know what's expected, and if you don't comply, you're the bad child, the ungrateful one, the selfish one. This is the manipulator's art, making you do what they want while making it feel like it was your choice, your failure, your responsibility. And here's why it works so devastatingly well. Manipulators exploit your virtues. Your empathy becomes the hook they use to reel you in. Your sense of fairness makes you vulnerable to false equivalencies. Your desire to be good makes you afraid of appearing bad. Your conflict aversion turns into a roadmap they follow straight to your compliance. The impact compounds over time, second-guessing your own perceptions. Am I being too sensitive? Am I imagining things? Maybe they're right and I'm the problem. Your decision-making becomes paralyzed. You can't trust your own judgment because it's been overridden so many times. You defer to others even on matters that directly affect you. Your boundaries erode completely. You've learned that setting them causes conflict, guilt, and accusations, so you stop setting them. You become permeable, accessible, exploitable. Your energy depletes. Constant vigilance against manipulation is exhausting. Defending yourself against accusations that aren't quite false but aren't quite true drains you. You're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. The Stoics understood this problem intimately. Roman political life was a viper's nest of manipulation. Seneca advised Emperor Nero while knowing one wrong word could mean execution. Epictetus navigated slavery, where manipulation and deception were survival tools. Marcus Aurelius dealt with senators who smiled while scheming. They couldn't afford to be naive, but they also refused to become manipulators themselves. So they develop something else, a systematic approach to maintaining their virtue while rendering themselves immune to others' manipulation. This matters because manipulation doesn't just affect individual interactions. It shapes your entire life trajectory. The job you don't pursue because someone convinced you you're not ready. The relationship you stay in because leaving would make you the villain. The self you never become because you're too busy being who others need you to be. You cannot build a life of virtue, purpose, and authenticity while being controlled by manipulators. The Stoic life requires sovereignty over your own mind, and that starts with recognizing and neutralizing manipulation. Let's go to Rome 121 AD. Marcus Aurelius is 30 years old, newly appointed as consul, navigating the treacherous waters of imperial politics. Around him are people who've made careers out of manipulation. Flatterers who praise him not for truth but for favor. Senators who smile while positioning themselves for his downfall. Court members who present every interaction as a transaction, though never stated explicitly. In his private journal he writes, "Be like the cliff against which waves continuously crash. It stands firm while the churning surf is stilled around it." He's not talking about physical threats. He's talking about manipulation. The waves of social pressure, guilt, obligation, and exploitation that constantly crash against anyone with power or goodness. But notice his approach. He doesn't fight the waves, he doesn't manipulate back. He doesn't become what he's dealing with. He becomes immovable, not through aggression but through clarity about who he is and what he values. Then there's Epictetus, born a slave. In slavery, manipulation isn't just common, it's essential for survival. Slaves manipulated each other for scraps of advantage. Masters manipulated slaves for compliance. The entire system ran on unspoken threats and carefully constructed dependencies. Epictetus could have emerged from this environment bitter and manipulative himself. Instead, he taught if someone tries to manipulate you through fear or desire, remember they have no power over you unless you give it to them through your own judgment. He developed what might be the most powerful anti-manipulation framework in history: radical ownership of your own reactions. A manipulator's power exists only in your response. Control your response and they have no power. And Seneca, advisor to one of history's most volatile emperors. Nero was brilliant but unstable, surrounded by manipulators vying for influence. Seneca watched colleagues flatter Nero into increasingly destructive decisions. He saw how manipulation worked at the highest levels. He wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those who you are capable of improving. The process is a mutual one. People learn as they teach." This is crucial. Seneca isn't saying avoid everyone who might manipulate you. That's impossible. He's saying be strategic about your associations. Spend time with people engaged in mutual growth, not mutual exploitation. But when he had to deal with manipulators, and as Nero's advisor, he constantly did, he employed specific tactics. He never gave manipulators emotional reactions. He remained calm, measured, impossible to provoke or fluster. He questioned everything. When someone presented something as obvious or urgent, he slowed down and examined it. He maintained his own counsel. He didn't need approval from those who would use that need against him. Eventually, Nero turned on him and ordered him to commit suicide. Even facing death, Seneca maintained his composure, spent his final hours teaching his students, and died without giving Nero the satisfaction of seeing him break. That's not just courage, it's the ultimate anti-manipulation stance. The one thing Nero wanted, Seneca's fear, his begging, his degradation, Seneca refused to give. The Stoics developed their approach to manipulation through direct experience in an environment where manipulation could mean death. Their tactics weren't theoretical, they were tested against some of history's most skilled political operators. What they discovered: manipulation works through emotional leverage. The manipulator needs you to feel something: fear, guilt, obligation, desire, and then act on that feeling without thinking. The Stoic response: create space between feeling and action. Feel what you feel, but don't let it dictate your response. Examine it, question it, choose consciously. This wasn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. Marcus Aurelius loved deeply, grieved genuinely, felt the full range of human emotion, but he didn't let those emotions become levers that others could pull to control him. That's the foundation of Stoic anti-manipulation tactics: emotional awareness without emotional reactivity. Here's what's going to shatter your understanding of how manipulation works. The reason you keep falling for manipulation isn't because you're weak, gullible, or stupid. It's because you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. You think manipulators are trying to deceive you. They're not. The best manipulators tell you the truth, just not all of it. They use real emotions, just not for the reasons they claim. They create genuine situations, then frame them dishonestly. This is why your logic fails against manipulation. You're fact-checking statements that are technically true while missing the frame that makes them lies. When your colleague says, "I'm really struggling with this deadline and you're so much better at this than me," every part of that might be factually accurate. They might genuinely struggle. You might genuinely be better. But the frame that you seeing friends is choosing them over your partner is the manipulation. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." He wasn't being philosophical, he was being tactical. He was reminding himself to question the frame, not just the facts. Once you understand this, everything changes. You stop defending yourself against facts and start examining frames. And that's when you become immune to manipulation. Let's understand exactly how manipulation works at the psychological level, because you can't counter what you don't understand. Manipulation operates through what psychologists call cognitive biases, mental shortcuts your brain takes to process information quickly. These shortcuts evolved to help you survive, but manipulators have learned to exploit them. The reciprocity trap. Your brain is wired for reciprocity. Someone does something for you and you feel obligated to return the favor. This evolved for good reason. Reciprocal communities survive better than selfish ones. But manipulators weaponize this. They do you unsolicited favors, things you didn't ask for, might not even want, then leverage the obligation you feel. You never agreed to the exchange, but your brain treats it like you did. The Stoics recognized this pattern. Seneca wrote extensively about false gifts, things given not from generosity but to create obligation. His advice: accept nothing that comes with invisible strings. The consistency trap. Humans have a deep need to appear consistent. Once you've said or done something, you feel pressure to continue acting in ways that align with that initial position, even if circumstances change. Manipulators use this brilliantly. They get you to agree to something small and reasonable. Then they escalate, relying on your need for consistency to keep you complying. You said you were a team player, small initial agreements, so you'll stay late to help with this project. Escalation: I thought you cared about the team. Consistency pressure: each step seems logical if you don't notice the frame shifting. Epictetus taught his students, don't be enslaved by your past statements. You are free to reassess and change direction when circumstances warrant. He's giving explicit permission to break consistency when it's being used against you. The scarcity trap. Your brain responds intensely to scarcity and urgency. Limited time, last chance, now or never. These phrases trigger decision-making shortcuts that bypass rational analysis. Manipulators create artificial scarcity and urgency. I need to know right now. This opportunity won't come again. Other people are interested, so if you don't decide, none of this might be true. But it triggers your scarcity response, making you act quickly before you can think clearly. Marcus Aurelius specifically countered this in his Meditations. Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. Translation: urgency is almost always artificial. What requires reason today will require reason tomorrow. Slow down. The authority trap. Humans are wired to defer to authority. This keeps social structures functioning but makes you vulnerable to anyone who can establish themselves as an authority, real or perceived. Manipulators establish authority through confidence, acting certain even when they're not. Credentials: real or exaggerated social proof. Everyone else agrees with me, titles and positions. Once they've established authority, your brain wants to defer to them, even when they're clearly wrong. The Stoic counter: question all authority, including your own assumptions. Epictetus taught, don't accept anything as true simply because an authority figure said it. Test it against reason and nature. The guilt trap. This is perhaps the most powerful manipulation tool: artificially created guilt. Manipulators are experts at making you feel responsible for things that aren't your responsibility. Their emotions: you made me feel. Their choices: I did this for you, so geth. Their circumstances: if you hadn't, then I wouldn't. They transfer ownership of their problems onto you, then leverage your guilt to extract compliance. The Stoics were crystal clear on this. You are responsible for your own actions and intentions, period. You are not responsible for how others choose to interpret or respond to your reasonable boundaries. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." He's pointing to the critical insight: the harm from guilt manipulation exists only in your acceptance of false responsibility. The isolation trap: manipulators work to isolate you from other perspectives. They want to be your primary or only source of reality interpretation. This looks like dismissing others' concerns. They just don't understand our relationship in the exeso. Creating us versus them dynamics is you and me against the world, monopolizing your time and energy, making you feel guilty for seeking outside input. Once isolated, you have no reference points to challenge the manipulator's frame. Their version of reality becomes your only version. Seneca specifically warned against this: associate with people who improve you and welcome those whom you can improve. He understood that multiple perspectives protect you from manipulation. The emotional flooding trap. When logic threatens to expose their manipulation, skilled manipulators shift to emotional flooding, overwhelming you with intense emotion: anger, tears, hysteria that makes rational discussion impossible. Your nervous system responds to their emotional intensity. Your brain shifts from logical processing to emotional crisis management. And in that state, you're highly vulnerable to whatever they want. The Stoic practice of maintaining equanimity directly counters this. Not suppressing emotion, but not being controlled by it, yours or theirs. Here's how these work together in practice. Imagine a manipulative boss. They do you an unsolicited favor, recommending you for a committee you didn't want to join. Reciprocity trap. Once you're on it, they ask you to take on more and more work, reminding you that you agreed to be a committed team member. Consistency trap. When you hesitate, they create urgency: I need this by end of day or the whole project fails. Scarcity trap. They leverage their position as your supervisor: I'm asking you to step up. Authority trap. If you push back, they express hurt: I went to bat for you and this is how you repay me. Guilt trap. They subtly suggest that others on the team don't have your concerns. Isolation trap. And if you persist in setting boundaries, they become emotional, angry or hurt to a degree that seems disproportionate, flooding you until you back down. Emotional flooding trap. Each tactic alone might be resistible, but in combination, deployed by someone who's practiced, they're devastating, unless you know exactly what's happening and have specific counters. That's what the Stoics developed: specific counters to each manipulation tactic. Not through manipulation in return, but through clarity, boundaries, and strategic emotional control. Stop and ask yourself this critical question: how many of your current obligations, relationships, and life choices did you actually choose, and how many were you manipulated into? That friend you keep supporting who never reciprocates, did you choose that dynamic, or did they establish it through subtle guilt and obligation? That job where you're doing 3 people's work, did you agree to that, or were you incrementally manipulated into it through appeals to your work ethic and team spirit? That relationship where you're constantly defending yourself, did you choose to be with someone who requires constant defense, or were you slowly conditioned to accept that as normal? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You might be living a life that's been substantially shaped by other people's manipulation rather than your own authentic choices. And the most insidious part, you've likely internalized their frame so deeply that you defend their version of reality even when they're not around. You tell yourself you're just being helpful when really you're being exploited. You believe you're too sensitive when really you're responding rationally to mistreatment. You think you owe people things you never actually agreed to. The Stoics would call this enslavement, not physical chains but mental ones, and they're often stronger because you don't even see them. The wake-up moment is this: until you can clearly identify manipulation, you can't make free choices. You're just responding to triggers that others have learned to pull. Let's examine what happens when you live under chronic manipulation, how it develops over time, and why it's so difficult to escape. Manipulation works through incremental normalization. The first time someone violates a boundary, it's obvious and shocking. The 10th time, it's just how things are. By the 100th time, you can't remember what appropriate boundaries even look like. This process follows a predictable pattern. Phase 1 testing. Every manipulator starts by testing. They push a small boundary, nothing dramatic, easily explainable as a mistake or misunderstanding. They're not testing the boundary itself, they're testing your response. Do you name it clearly? That's not okay. Do you enforce a consequence? If that happens again, I'm leaving. Or do you let it slide? Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Your response determines everything that follows. Manipulators aren't looking for perfect victims, they're looking for responsive ones. People who react to their tests by accommodating, explaining, or doubting themselves. If you respond with clear boundaries, they typically move on to easier targets. If you accommodate, they proceed to phase 2. Phase 2: establishment. Once they know you're responsive to manipulation, they begin establishing their control more thoroughly. They create patterns, regular crises that require your immediate attention, emotional reactions that train you to avoid certain topics or actions, rewards and punishments, though never framed that way, that shape your behavior. During this phase, they're also isolating you from alternative perspectives. They don't do this dramatically. No one explicitly forbids you from seeing friends or seeking advice. It's subtler. They create tension around your other relationships. I'm fine with you seeing them, I just thought we were spending today together. They frame outside input as threatening. Your therapist doesn't understand our unique situation. They position themselves as the only one who truly gets you. No one else understands you like I do. Over time, their perspective becomes your primary lens for interpreting reality. Phase 3: dependence. By this phase, you've become dependent on the manipulator, not necessarily financially or practically, but psychologically. You've learned that your perception of reality can't be trusted. They've challenged it too many times. You've learned that your emotional reactions are too much or not enough. They've told you this repeatedly. You've learned that your boundaries are unreasonable. They frame them that way consistently. So you depend on them to tell you what's real, what's reasonable, what's appropriate. They've become your external decision-making system. This is where manipulation becomes truly dangerous, because now you defend them. When others point out the manipulation, you explain it away. You've internalized their frame so deeply that you genuinely can't see it anymore. The Stoics saw this pattern in Roman political life constantly. They watched people become so psychologically dependent on emperors, patrons, or political allies that they couldn't imagine life without that relationship, even when it was clearly destroying them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have the power to strip away many superfluous troubles located wholly in your judgment." You immediately open up for yourself a large and spacious plain by encompassing the whole cosmos in your mind. He's offering a path out. Recognize that the troubles are in your judgment, your acceptance of their frames, not in external reality. Change the judgment and you open up space to breathe again. The cognitive costs of chronic manipulation. Living under manipulation doesn't just affect specific relationships, it damages your cognitive functioning across all domains. Decision paralysis. When your decisions have been consistently overridden or reframed, you lose confidence in your own judgment. Simple choices become agonizing. You second-guess everything. You need external validation for decisions you should be able to make independently. Hypervigilance. You're constantly monitoring for manipulation, trying to read hidden meanings, looking for traps. This is exhausting and prevents you from being present in genuine relationships. Reality distortion. You can no longer trust your own perceptions. When someone treats you poorly, you wonder if you're being too sensitive. When you feel hurt, you wonder if you're overreacting. Your internal compass has been so consistently challenged that it no longer points true. Emotional dysregulation. Chronic manipulation keeps your nervous system in a state of low-grade activation. You're irritable, anxious, prone to outsized reactions to small triggers because you're already operating at 70% capacity before anything happens. Identity erosion. Over time, you forget who you are, separate from others' needs and expectations. You've spent so long being who others wanted you to be that you can't access your authentic self. The Stoics understood all of this. Epictetus taught students who had been enslaved, who had every aspect of their selfhood stripped away. His teaching was fundamentally about reclaiming sovereignty over your own mind, the one thing that could never truly be taken unless you surrendered it. Why smart, strong people fall for manipulation. There's a myth that only weak or naive people get manipulated. This is dangerously false. Smart people get manipulated because they trust their ability to assess situations rationally, not realizing that manipulation operates below the level of conscious rational analysis. Strong people get manipulated because they pride themselves on handling difficulties, not recognizing that some difficulties are manufactured specifically to exploit that strength. Empathetic people get manipulated because they naturally consider others' feelings, which gives manipulators clear emotional leverage. Successful people get manipulated because they're used to relationships being transactional. They don't notice when transactions become exploitative. The Stoics were among the most educated, capable, powerful people of their time. Yet they took manipulation seriously as a threat precisely because they understood intelligence and strength don't protect you from manipulation. Only specific awareness and practiced responses do. The manipulator's ultimate weapon, your own goodness. Here's the deepest insight about manipulation. The manipulator's power comes from your virtues, not your weaknesses. They exploit your empathy by presenting themselves as victims. They exploit your intelligence to be amplifier. Them I thought me knowing or my when you use them. Then actually think. Outside their presence, outside their emotional field, examine what just happened. What are they asking for? What frame are they using? What emotion are they trying to trigger? What would I choose if I weren't feeling pressured? Epictetus taught first impressions are involuntary. What happens next is up to you. The pause is how you reclaim the what happens next. Manipulators hate this tactic because it neutralizes urgency, one of their primary tools. They've crafted their manipulation to work in the moment. The pause takes away the moment. When they push back against the pause, I need to know now, that's confirmation you're being manipulated. Legitimate requests can wait for thoughtful responses. Only manipulation requires instant compliance. Practice this week. Practice pausing on AL requests for your time, energy, or resources, not just suspicious ones. Make it a habit to never agree to anything in the moment. Notice how different your decisions are when made from calm reflection versus immediate pressure. Tactic 2: the dichotomy of control. What? The foundational Stoic principle distinguishes rigidly between what you control, your thoughts, judgments, actions, and what you don't, everything else, including others' reactions. Against manipulation, this becomes a weapon. Manipulators operate by making their problems your responsibility. They're upset, so you must fix it. They're struggling, so you must sacrifice. They're uncomfortable, so you must change. The weaponized dichotomy of control destroys this completely. When they say you're making me feel, you respond, I don't control your feelings. I control my actions, which I believe are reasonable. When they say if you really cared, you respond, I care about you, but I don't control what caring means to you. I control what I'm willing to do, and this is my boundary. When they say I'm so disappointed, that you respond, I understand you're disappointed. That's not something I can control. You're not being mean, you're being clear. Their emotional state is theirs to manage. Your responsibility is your own actions and their reasonableness, not managing their reactions to your boundaries. Marcus Aurelius wrote this reminder to himself: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Against manipulators, you flip this: you have power over your mind, not mine. Practice this when someone expresses an emotion and implies you're responsible for fixing it. Practice saying, I hear that you're feeling emotion. What are you going to do about it? This returns ownership of their emotional state to them, where it belongs. Tactic 3: radical transparency. The mirror. Manipulators rely on operating beneath conscious awareness. They use implication, suggestion, tone, plausible deniability as essential to their approach. The mirror tactic destroys this by making the implicit explicit. When you sense manipulation, say exactly what you observe they're doing. I notice you're creating urgency around this decision. Why? It seems like you're trying to make me feel guilty for having this boundary. Is that accurate? Every time I mention spending time with others, you get upset. What's happening there? You asked me to do X, but when I said no, you shifted to making it about whether I care about you. Those seem like different conversations. You're not accusing, you're observing. You're holding up a mirror to their behavior and asking them to explain it explicitly. Manipulators hate this because 1. It forces them to either acknowledge the manipulation, which removes its power, or deny it, which makes continued manipulation obvious. 2. It shifts the conversation from content to process, from what they want to how they're trying to get it. Seneca practiced this in Nero's court. When people would make veiled threats or suggestions, he would say, are you telling me that? Forcing them to state clearly what they were implying. Most back down rather than be that explicit. Practice this when someone communicates through implication. Practice saying, just so I'm clear, are you saying explicit version of implication? Watch them scramble to either own it or backtrack. Tactic 4: the broken record boundary reinforcement. Manipulators are persistent. They'll approach the same boundary from different angles, using different emotional levers, wearing you down until you give in. The broken record tactic: state your boundary once clearly. Then no matter how many times or ways they approach it, repeat the exact same statement without explanation or justification. Example: I really need you to do this for me. You are not available to do that. Then, but it would only take you an hour and it would help me so much. You: I understand, but I'm not available to do that. Them: I thought you cared about me. You: I do care and I'm not available to do that. Them: you're being really selfish right now. You: I'm not available to do that. Notice no justification, no explaining, no defending. Just calm repetition of the boundary. This works because manipulators are looking for an opening, something in your explanation they can argue against, reframe, or guilt you about. When you give them nothing but repetition, there's nothing to work with. Epictetus taught, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Your boundary is the philosophy. It doesn't require justification. Practice this: pick one boundary you've been struggling to maintain. Craft one clear sentence that states it. This week, when anyone pushes against that boundary, use only that sentence no matter what they say. Tactic 5. Strategic withdrawal, the walk away. Manipulators require your participation. They need you present, engaged, responding. The most powerful tactic is often the simplest. Remove yourself from the situation. When manipulation escalates, when emotional flooding begins, when you feel yourself getting drawn into their frame, you physically leave. I'm going to step away from this conversation. I need a break from this discussion. I'm leaving now. Then you actually leave. The room, the house, the situation. This is not running away. This is strategic withdrawal, a recognized military tactic. You disengage from a battle you can't win on terrain that favors your opponent, and you regroup on ground of your choosing. Manipulators will escalate when you do this. Don't walk away from me. You're being ridiculous. We need to resolve this now. This is confirmation that leaving is correct. They need you there to maintain control. Your presence is their power. Marcus Aurelius regularly withdrew from Rome to think clearly, away from the manipulation and pressure of the court. He understood that you cannot make good decisions while under siege. Practice this. Identify your exit strategy from every important relationship and situation in your life. How would you physically leave if manipulation escalated? Know this in advance so you're not figuring it out in the moment. Then practice actually leaving when you recognize manipulation happening. Build the muscle. Tactic 6. The reality check network. Manipulators work to isolate you from alternative perspectives. The counter deliberately maintain relationships with people who give you reality checks. Build a small network of people who have no investment in your manipulative relationship, will tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable, can help you distinguish reasonable from unreasonable. When you're uncertain whether you're being manipulated or being too sensitive, you run the situation by your reality check network. Describe the facts, just the observable behaviors. Without interpretation, they said X, I said Y. They responded with Z. Ask, does this seem reasonable to you? Am I missing something? If multiple people in your network identify the same pattern as manipulation, trust that over your own doubt. Manipulators will undermine this network. Your friends don't understand. They're just jealous. Why do you need to discuss our private matters with others? This resistance confirms the network's value. Seneca wrote extensively about the value of wise friendships, people who challenge and improve you. This wasn't just philosophical, it was protective. Wise friends protect you from manipulation by offering alternative perspectives. Practice this. Identify 2-3 people you trust to be honest with you. Ask them explicitly, I sometimes struggle to tell if I'm being manipulated or if I'm overreacting. Can I check situations with you? Then actually use them. Don't just maintain the relationships, actively bring them your doubts. Tactic 7. The consequence framework. The previous tactics prevent manipulation from working. This one stops it from continuing. The consequence framework clear. Stated enforced consequences for continued manipulation attempts. This is not punishment, it's natural consequences. It sounds like if you continue to guilt trip me when I set boundaries, I will reduce the time I spend with you. If you keep trying to make your emotions my responsibility, I will not engage in these conversations. If you cannot respect this boundary after I've stated it clearly, our relationship will change. Then, and this is critical, you actually enforce the consequences. Not angrily, not as revenge, as a simple natural result of their choice. They guilt trip again, you reduce contact. They make their emotions your responsibility, you don't engage. They violate the boundary, the relationship changes. Manipulators are used to empty threats and flexible boundaries. They've learned most people don't follow through. When you actually enforce consequences calmly and consistently, the manipulation stops. either because they change their behavior or because you've removed yourself from their influence. Marcus Aurelius had to enforce consequences, constantly removing people from positions, limiting access to his presence, ending relationships. He did it without malice, as a simple matter of protecting his own capacity to rule effectively. Practice this for one relationship where manipulation is happening. 1. Identify the specific manipulative behavior. 2. State clearly what will happen if it continues. 3. Enforce the consequence the first time it happens again. No warnings, no second chances after the stated boundary. Immediate, calm enforcement. How these tactics work together. Notice these tactics build on each other. The pause gives you time to recognize manipulation. The dichotomy clarifies what's actually your responsibility. The mirror makes the manipulation explicit. The broken record maintains boundaries against pressure. The walk away removes you from escalation. The network confirms your reality. The consequences make continued manipulation costly. Together they create a system where manipulation simply cannot operate effectively. You've removed all the leverage points manipulators require. Let me show you these tactics in action through real scenarios. Workplace example. The boundary-violating boss. Jennifer's boss constantly asked her to take on extra work by framing it as opportunities and suggesting that refusing meant she wasn't committed to her career. After learning Stoic tactics, here's how an interaction changed. Boss Jennifer, I have an exciting opportunity for you. The Henderson project needs someone with your skills, and I immediately thought of you. Jennifer, recognizing the frame, employing the pause. Let me review my current workload and get back to you tomorrow. Boss, this really can't wait. I need someone committed to jump on this. Jennifer, dichotomy of control. I understand it's urgent for you. I need until tomorrow to make a responsible decision about my capacity. I'll email you by 9 a.m. Boss, next day after Jennifer declined, I'm really disappointed. I thought you were more of a team player. Jennifer, the mirror. I notice when I set boundaries around my workload, it gets framed as not being a team player. Can we talk about that directly? Boss, I just mean that sometimes we need to go above and beyond. Jennifer, broken record, I've assessed my capacity, and I'm not available for this project. Boss, but Jennifer, broken record, I'm not available for this project. The boss, finding no leverage, moved to someone else. Over time, Jennifer noticed she stopped being the first person asked for extra work. Personal relationship example. The guilt-tripping parent. Michael's mother called weekly, expressing how lonely she was, how other children visited their parents more, how she didn't want to be a burden while very clearly being one. After implementing Stoic tactics, Mother, I haven't heard from you in so long. I just sit here all alone, Michael. The pause, I hear you're feeling lonely. What are you doing to address that? Mother, what am I supposed to do? I'm all alone. If you cared, you'd visit more. Michael, dichotomy of control, I do care, and I'm not responsible for managing your loneliness. I visit once a month, which is what I can sustain. Mother, so you're saying you don't care about your own mother? Michael, the mirror, I notice you're making this about whether I care, but we're actually talking about visit frequency. Those are different things. Mother, well, if you can't even Michael, strategic withdrawal. Mom, I'm going to end this call. I'll talk to you next week. Mother, don't you dare hang up on me. Michael, talk to you next week. Hangs up. He then called 2 friends in his reality check network to process the interaction and confirm he wasn't being cruel. The next week, his mother started the same pattern. Michael employed the consequence framework. Mom, I want to have a relationship with you. But if our calls continue to be guilt trips about not visiting more, I'll reduce our call frequency. I'm willing to have a positive conversation once a week or a difficult conversation once a month. Your choice. After 2 enforced consequences, he actually reduced call frequency. When she continued the guilt trips, her behavior changed. Not completely, but enough to make the relationship sustainable. Friendship example. The energy vampire friend Sarah had a friend who only called when she needed something: emotional support, practical help, crisis management. But when Sarah needed support, the friend was mysteriously unavailable. After discovering Stoic tactics, friend Sarah, I'm having the worst day. Can you talk? Sarah, pause. I have about 15 minutes. What's going on? Friend, it's going to take more than 15 minutes. This is really serious. Sarah, broken record, I have 15 minutes right now. Friend, I can't believe you're putting a time limit on our friendship. Sarah, mirror. I notice when I set boundaries on my availability, you make it about the friendship itself. Let me be clear, I have 15 minutes now. If you need more, we can schedule another time. Which works for you? Friend, fine, forget it. You're obviously too busy for me. Sarah, consequence framework, I offered you 15 minutes now or more time scheduled later. If neither works for you, I understand. But I notice you frame my boundaries as rejection. If that continues, I'll need to reconsider how much energy I can put into this friendship. The friend, not used to encountering boundaries, initially withdrew. Sarah used her reality check network to confirm she wasn't being a bad friend. 2 weeks later, the friend returned, and the dynamic had shifted. She started respecting Sarah's time and, interestingly, became more available when Sarah needed support. Common pattern. Across examples. Notice what happened in each case. 1. The manipulation was named explicitly. 2. Boundaries were stated clearly without justification. 3. Consequences were enforced calmly. 4. The relationship either improved or ended, both acceptable outcomes. Most importantly, the person employing Stoic tactics didn't become a manipulator themselves. They remained honest, clear, and consistent with their values. They just stopped accepting manipulation. Here's the truth that changes everything about how you understand manipulation. Every time you accept manipulation, you're not just being controlled in that moment. You're training the manipulator that their tactics work, which guarantees they'll continue and escalate. Every time you fail to enforce a boundary, you're not keeping the peace. You're making future conflicts inevitable and more difficult. Every time you take responsibility for someone else's emotional state, you're not being kind. You're preventing them from developing emotional maturity. The Stoics understood something we've forgotten: there is no kindness in allowing someone to remain manipulative. Not to them, and certainly not to yourself. When you employ these tactics, when you create boundaries, name manipulation, enforce consequences, you might be called selfish, cold, uncaring, cruel. Let them call you that. Marcus Aurelius was called all those things. So was Epictetus. So was Seneca. By people who wanted to manipulate them and couldn't. The Stoics knew your responsibility is to your own virtue, not others' comfort with your boundaries. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The suffering you imagine from setting boundaries, the conflict, the judgment, the loss, is almost always worse in your mind than in reality. And even when it's difficult in reality, it's still better than the slow death of living under constant manipulation. Here's what happens when you consistently apply these tactics. Manipulators either 1. Adjust their behavior because manipulation no longer works. 2. Escalate briefly to test your resolve. 3. Leave your life in search of easier targets. All 3 outcomes are acceptable. Better than acceptable, they're victories. Because you're no longer living in service to others' manipulation. You're living according to your own reason, your own values, your own consciously chosen principles. That's the Stoic ideal. Not a life without difficult people, but a life where difficult people cannot control you. Epictetus once told a student, if you wish to be free, desire nothing and no one that's controlled by others. This isn't about isolation or self-sufficiency. It's about sovereignty, true internal freedom that no manipulator can touch. The tactics you've learned today are not weapons to hurt others. They're shields to protect yourself. They're boundaries that allow you to remain virtuous even when surrounded by people who abandoned virtue long ago. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire, arguably the most manipulative environment in human history. Yet he maintained his character, his principles, his peace of mind. Not by avoiding manipulators, that was impossible in his position, but by becoming immune to their manipulation through exactly the tactics we've discussed. He knew who he was. He knew what was his responsibility and what wasn't. He spoke clearly, enforced boundaries, and refused to let others' emotional manipulation determine his choices. You can do the same. Not because you're an emperor with absolute power, but because you have something more fundamental: sovereignty over your own mind. That colleague who takes credit for your work, they can take credit, but they can't take your knowledge of what you actually did. And with clear boundaries, they can't keep doing it. That family member who wields guilt like a weapon, they can try, but if you don't accept false responsibility, the weapon has nothing to strike. That friend who only appears when they need something, they can ask, but if you enforce consequences for one-sided relationships, the dynamic changes or ends. In every case, you're returning to the foundational Stoic principle: you control your own judgments, your own actions, your own responses. That's your domain. Everything else, including how manipulators feel about your boundaries, is outside your control and therefore outside your concern. This isn't easy. The tactics are simple, but application requires practice. You'll backslide. You'll feel guilty. You'll second-guess yourself. That's normal. That's part of the process of reclaiming your sovereignty from people who've held it for too long. But every time you apply these tactics, every time you pause instead of react, state a boundary instead of explain, enforce a consequence instead of make an exception, you're building the muscle. You're becoming the person Marcus Aurelius described like the cliff against which waves continuously crash. It stands firm while the churning surf is stilled around it. The waves don't stop crashing. Manipulators don't stop trying. But you become immovable. Not through hardness or cruelty, but through clarity about who you are and what you will and won't accept. That's the Stoic path. That's true power. That's freedom, not a life without manipulators. That's impossible. But a life where manipulators are irrelevant because they have no leverage, no opening, no way to reach the part of you that matters. Your mind remains your own. Your choices remain your own. Your life remains your own. And that, ultimately, is the only revenge you need against anyone who tried to take those things from you. Remaining free.